Morning, everybody. We are just going to give it another minute or two for some other people to join. But thank you for joining so far. We'll just give it until 11:01. Not long.
Thank you.
I'm always impatient.
I know.
It's 11 o'clock. I just want to get on with it. Let's just give it until 11:01, and then it's all being recorded anyway. So if people are a bit late, they can catch up that way.
Longest minute.
I know.
It's true. No. Right, there we go. 11:01. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is Jenny, and I'm the managing director here at Dragon Argent. So we are a boutique professional services firm. So we do law and accountancy and advisory for fast growth startup and scaling businesses. One of the things that's really important to us is that we find experts that have complementary, expertise that we know that would be useful for our clients, and that we have conversations with them to kind of pick their brains to bring and to add some more value to our clients over and above the services that we offer. So this morning, what we're going to be talking about is recruitment and how that ties in with employment processes and some of the legal stuff. So I would love to introduce Kerry. So we're joined by Kerry from Redimeer Recruitment. So I'll ask Kerry to introduce herself, then Dee will introduce herself, and then we'll kick off with some questions.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Kerry. I work at Redimeer, and we're a small team of specialists that cover all areas working for startup growth. So we tend to work on a consultative model approach where we build long-term relationships, and we've had some really good successes with fintechs, insurtechs, and SaaS startups.
You've got a wonderful stat, which might be a good one. I really like this one. This blew my mind in our practice one.
Oh yeah, so my director's always telling us that the first 10 hires within a startup or a scale-up sort of business that's looking to grow is going to go on to recruit the next sort of 80 employees, which will shape the business. So it's one we always sort of live by when we're talking with clients.
Yeah, perfect. It's important. It just shows the importance of actually getting it right from the start.
Yeah.
And then we're also joined by Dee.
Yeah, so my name is Dee, and I'm an employment solicitor at Dragon Argent. And as Jenny has already covered, we focus on a lot of startups and companies in their early stages of growth. And so that's mainly the sort of clientele that I offer.
Perfect. So as managing director, my role includes a million things. Recruitment is one of them. And as you said, Kerry, getting it right and getting the right people is so important for small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So that we've only got 22 of us here. So we spend a lot of time and effort making sure that we do find the right people. But absolutely, when you look at the industry and you look at your clients, what are the best ways that you see people do? What do they do to attract top talent?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of like a challenge that they might have, it's really at this early stage is that lack of stability. Yeah. So a startup company doesn't really have a recognized brand, and in this current economy, it's a risky move to maybe potentially be leaving an established business or somewhere you've been there a long time, to really take that risk and go in right back to scratch to a startup that, hopefully will be successful, but that is a risk that you might take. And as a founder or someone that's at that early stage setting up a business, your main focus probably isn't recruitment at that stage, nor is it your expertise. And so do you have the resources available and the knowledge of the particular skill sets and the niche skills that you might need to help your business grow, whether that be IT, marketing, even executive level? What do you need from these people? And are you going to understand that with your own experience and put the time into kind of finding candidates that are already, headhunting. That's candidates are in roles usually is where you're going to find that talent. And that is probably the biggest challenge in finding the talent is, do you have the time?
Yeah, do you have the time? And like you say, do you know what you're looking for?
Exactly.
And often it is a case of you don't know what you don't know. So I suppose the benefit, certainly in terms of the skills and the way that you partner with clients, you must have a good sense as to what skill sets, fintechs in particular, or businesses of that size. What are the skill sets that you see that people need?
Yeah, so I particularly work for marketing and I recruit all kind of marketing roles, and I've seen a massive upturn in the digital skill set. So it's quite a challenging find when you're looking on the market for those particular skill sets, especially when clients are looking for that like-for-like industry experience. And so that's a candidate that's potentially been involved with a startup previously, they've maybe had experience in funding rounds, and they've had successful growth within their particular role that they're going to be able to transfer into this new business and bring that skill along with them. I was talking to a colleague of mine a couple of weeks ago, and he recruits customer success roles, and something that we were talking about is the lack of commercial focus and sort of commercial awareness in some of the candidates that he talks to. And for startups, that's extremely important at this stage to have that sort of commercial awareness when you're going into this business. So, again, for him in his particular industry, that's a shortage that he would find. But it really does depend on, the structure of the organization, their need at that time, and why they're recruiting that position, because I think that's a big understanding the strategic goal of that recruitment piece and what that person's going to bring, to the business is half the battle, really.
Yeah, and but for the commercial awareness bit is an interesting one, because we've got so we have 3 values here at Dragon Argent. So being commercial, collaborative, and curious. They're something that we look for in every bit in all of our team, and they're values that we embed throughout the business. What does that actually, like being commercially aware, what does that actually mean? How do you find that?
Yeah, so I think it'll depend on the role, and what the position is in the business. Kevin, the colleague I was talking about, he's got his own screening process, so he certainly knows how to pick them out. But I know for his customer success roles, he looks for their involvement in the commercial negotiations, or whether they're involved in the sales element, or does the sales team run all of that, and the account executives. So, depending on the role, we have ways in which we would ask the right questions and make sure we're getting that information from the candidates.
Okay, perfect. So the right questions.
The right questions is important.
Is the key. So Dee Dee, now onto the kind of practical side. So, assuming we've asked the right questions and got some candidates, what are the practical things to think about in the next part of the stage?
Yeah, so I think even before we've gone about asking questions, I think it's good for a business to think about what's the person's specification. So who are you wanting to recruit? How much are you wanting to offer them? When do you need this person to join the business? The interviewing technique, which you've touched on, and then making offers and acceptance, and thinking about the fact that you may need to allow time for negotiating that offer. So those are all things that you can think of, in the meantime, or just before you even start interviewing. Okay, so that's like the planning. So making sure that you're not in a position where you where you're rushed, really. So just making the time and putting the effort in right at the start to get the job description completely crystal clear, and assuming, presumably 3-month notice period is pretty common. So assuming if you're doing any succession planning that you've left enough time to do that, to get the candidate that you're looking for, rather than being slightly on the back foot and perhaps feeling a bit pushed to get a candidate that maybe doesn't work out quite as well. Okay, so Kerry, with your experience with all your industry, where do you see interview processes going really well? Yeah,
so I think in this particular situation where you've got startups and smaller businesses, a short one where possible. Obviously you want to take your time and you are looking for the right candidate, as we mentioned, but that's going to be your real advantage against those larger corporations that maybe have a longer process, or, you know, being able to be flexible and have that approach that if for whatever reason a candidate's situation changes, or, you know, it's a very competitive market, can you make decisions quicker than other companies? That's really going to set you aside of, you know, these other companies that they may be interviewing at. And, you know, communication at this stage is what's really, really important, because this is your brand and this is what you're going to get feedback on. So the communication, whether that be positive for the candidates that are moving forward in process, or not so positive for candidates that have been unsuccessful. You know, if you've met with a candidate, giving them that feedback that they've not been successful is not as nice as it is. You know, I don't really like to give that feedback to my candidates, but they're going to go on and talk to their network about the experience that they've had with your company. And if that's negative, that's going to affect your brand. So that, I'd say, is key in the interview process.
Yeah, so a job I had many moons ago now was in the brand experience team at a big corporate, and one of the ways that we looked at the whole experience was every single touch point. So, you know, at any point, who do they speak to? What do they do? How do they interact with your brand from the start to the finish? So this is just showing actually that even though they're not, this isn't, you know, they're not day one of an employee, so it's not about yet the, you know, the welcome gifts and all of that, but it's actually just, it's really important then to make sure you've got the time and attention to give them the best experience
through the process.
I mean,
something we would usually suggest, if possible, to let the candidates speak to other employees within the company, whether that be a little less formal, where they can have, you know, conversations, they can ask different questions they might not want to ask the founder. But, you know, in a whole, depending on if you're using agency or not, as most agencies will do, like a screening call beforehand, you know, a 3-stage, maybe 4, depending on the level of the candidate, you know, usually with an assessment in the middle is probably what we'd recommend.
Okay, so now with the legal legal side of things, what are the legal things that we've got to be really aware of throughout the recruitment process?
So one of the most important things is being careful that you are not discriminating when you are having the full recruitment process. And that can be any sort of detrimental treatment that is connected to a protected characteristic of a candidate. So the main ones that a lot of people know will be age, race, disability, gender reassignment. And the whole idea is that you want to ensure that you're not making any sort of detrimental decisions based on that. So I'm talking about not giving a job to someone because of their age, for example, or being discriminatory in the way that you have the layout of an interview room if the person has, you know, a disability. Candidates can bring a claim for discrimination at that point, at any point in the recruitment process, if they feel that they've been discriminated against. So it is something that prospective employers do need to bear in mind and need to be very careful about.
Okay, so being really being aware of that there is a risk is one thing. What do they need to do to mitigate that risk?
So I think I would always suggest that whoever is leading an interview process or is interviewing a candidate, that they're actually aware of the principles of the Equality Act. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so if someone who is interviewing a candidate isn't aware of those principles, they can land themselves in hot water inadvertently.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that you do see is where employers didn't actually know that they weren't allowed to ask a certain question or do things or arrange things a certain way. B would always be take legal advice from an amazing employment solicitor like me. But in all seriousness, it is important to take legal advice because you can get the sort of results that you want. It's just about being careful about the way that you go about it.
So presumably, so things like recruitment, like handbooks or guides of sort of how to, what to ask, what not to ask, and those sorts of things are they're useful things that we've done with some other clients.
Yeah.
Okay.
So really important. Another thing is not asking questions that you're not supposed to. So anything to do about a candidate's health, really they're prohibited before you make a job offer. And I think that stems back to disability discrimination. You don't want it to appear that you've not given somebody a job because actually you found out that they have a long-term condition. You can ask questions after you've made a job offer because you want to ensure that they can do the job safely. But even then, you do need to be quite careful about it.
Okay, and what other legal things are there to bear in mind with all of this?
I think some of the things to bear in mind as well would be to ensure that you've got the right employment documentation. And so at the point of wanting to make a job offer, maybe you want to give a job, an offer letter. But something to also consider is the fact that a written offer and a verbal offer, they're just as legally binding as each other. And so a lot of people think that just because an offer is verbal, that actually it doesn't have any weight, but actually it does. And so that is something to bear in mind. So I would always say to slow down and make sure that you do want to offer someone a job, or think about the language that you're using, because legally, depending on what you say, you could have actually made a legally binding offer of employment to somebody.
Okay. Right, wowzers. So
think about.
But that's why, you know, taking the time to plan it all from the start, and then that kind of, you know, the focus just needs to be maintained then really throughout, doesn't it? To make sure that the job spec is right from the start, to make sure that the questions and the people, the training, the hiring people are trained and you know, are aware of what to ask and what not to ask. And then to make sure that actually at the stage of offer, then everything is done in exactly the right way, because that's where, you know, we talked about communication already in terms of feedback, but that's where making sure that, again, putting my sort of brand experience hat on, making sure, you know, if you've been fantastic at communication in the early stages, and then as soon as you actually offer it, then you're like, phew, found them, done. Then actually that could sort of change the way that the candidate perceives the brand. Okay, any other legally bits? We've covered discrimination, things not to ask, questions. So what about it? So from an age point of view, I know we've talked about protected characteristics. So as one of the older members of our team, proud, 42, one of the things which is interesting in that is that, you know, if you need experience, then sometimes experience comes with age, but sometimes it doesn't.
How do you advertise that?
How do you advertise that?
So you can ask for experienced candidates. You have to be careful that the role that you are advertising for an experienced candidate, you can reasonably and objectively justify why you need an experienced candidate. So if you're looking at a managing director role, or someone who is really senior, who's going to lead a team, it would be objectively justifiable why you need that. However, if you were advertising for a more junior role, perhaps, and then you're asking for a very experienced candidate, well, it doesn't make any sense. It's not proportional, and then you're more likely to find yourself in a situation where it could potentially lead to be discriminatory, because you can't justify why you need someone.
Okay, so it's all just about being really clear, and I'm obviously not saying that the older the wiser, because obviously that's not always that's exactly not allowed to say that. So okay, so we've talked about the legal side of things. From a compliance side of things, are there any other compliance, you know, regulatory bits involved in this?
I think when it comes to partnering with a recruitment company, I think employers can sometimes think that the recruiter, they have the responsibility for completing right to work checks and making sure that a candidate has the right to work in the UK. Obviously, different recruitment agencies will act completely different, and you'll have your own separate terms and conditions with that recruitment agency. But I would always say, really the liability will fall on the employer.
Yeah.
So regardless of the agreement that you have with a recruiter, and even if you believe that they are going to complete right to work checks, I would always say still complete them yourself as well, just in case.
How do you do that? How do you do complete a right to work check?
So right to work checks, so that's there's all sorts of different ways to do right to work checks, but the main one is basically reviewing their ID.
Okay.
So maybe it might be looking at their passport, seeing them in person, taking a copy of that, and then keeping a copy of that safely. But there are lots of different ways of doing right to work checks, and a lot of it is clearly outlined on the Gov website. But we do have a fantastic immigration specialist here at DM.
Okay, so it depends on where they're coming from, what the role is,
and what their visas, and what different requirements for graduates and global talent visas. There's different requirements that you can look into, really, depending on the company's setup as well. A lot of startups don't necessarily have the capacity and the legal side to offer that sponsorship at this initial sort of starting phase, but potentially down the line it's information that they will want and need.
And it's actually something we've started. I mean, we're a regulated law firm, so we obviously have all sorts of regulatory requirements, and we use a software provider to do all of our know your customer checks, and we actually run any employees through that for part of that reason. So Kerry, back to you. If you are a business of our size, business of the size of the people probably on the call, what is the benefit of finding a recruitment partner, and what do you offer? This is your chance to just plug for me.
So I mean, I think if you're looking to choose a recruitment partner, in this specific field, it's looking for someone that has experience in that ecosystem and that can understand the challenges that you're going to face, potentially your strategic goals and why you would want this person at this particular point of growth. For Redimeer, we've worked, multiple years with startups. We've taken them through scaling, funding series, A, B, C. And we then now can understand at what point are we going to see this business need customer success, going to need digital marketing, and understand the why behind that. And so I think you want to look for someone that can embed in your business. And, we look at ourselves as an extension of the clients that we work with rather than an external agency that they reach out to once or twice. We want to be with you through all stages of growth and be part of your success as well. It's an exciting time, it's an exciting ecosystem. And for us, we work on like an account manager sort of approach. So you have one point of contact who will be your communication back and forth, and then they will delegate the sort of requirements to the expert that can deal with that sort of niche skill set. But the biggest thing, and not something to be overlooked, is that real trust and transparency. We don't like to beat around the bush and we expect that from our clients as well. So we really hope that we have a relationship that we can just be honest and give feedback and insight and really sort of work together.
I mean, it's so. I mean, I know that you two have known each other for a while, and I know that the whole idea of this webinar was because you did in talking about what we do in our approach, and in talking about what you do in your approach. There is such a parallel, because that's how we want to work with our clients as well. Is that they, we know that founders, we know that lots of people are. Like we started off, if you've got so much to do, you're passionate about your product, you're passionate about the service, the business that you're growing, but actually there's only so many hours in the day. And it's quite hard to do all the other various bits, whether it be recruitment or the legal side or the accountancy side or whatever. So I think having that partnership in the background is absolutely, I can completely see how that's useful.
It can take up to 50 hours to recruit one person, in terms of time across the business, whether that be from shortlisting applications to screening calls to the due diligence that you have to do, and then getting them through process. That's a long time if you've got to do that multiple times as well.
Well, and that's the whole opportunity cost. What else could you be doing? What else could you be doing to build your business in those 50 hours?
And are you going to find the best, I think, is where you don't have the time to do that.
And with the customer success one, just a specific question on that before we go on to our last question. At what stage, when is the right time for people to hire customer success? person?
Yeah, and it usually sort of comes in once it's a little bit more established.
Yeah.
And you've got that sort of sales teams embedded, and you're having some success at that point is when that person's going to come in and really look at the next stage and how they can add value to the business at that point.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So you get the sales team properly in place, properly functioning well.
Yeah,
and
you're
then
doing your
point...
outbound stuff, and then you're sort of looking more at that customer focus and the right target audience and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Again, as well with the marketing side as well, you probably already have a small, maybe one marketing person that's helping with that brand building and those main sort of general marketing areas. And then at that point, once you're a bit more established, you'll look to bring in maybe a growth marketeer, the digital side that can help with reaching that further audience and understanding the data that's coming in.
Yeah, it's interesting how the different, because we spend a lot of time internally talking about, the first year, for example, of a client, and what are the legal requirements that they need, what are the accounting, they need to file their accounts, and those particular things. But it's interesting then partnering that with your expertise about knowing, okay, if a funding round is coming up or they're about to hit a certain milestone, then collectively, actually, what will they need? So Dee, back to you. Final question, and then we'll ask if anybody else has got any questions to ask to the team. When you look at all the clients that we have and the involvement that you've had so far in this whole recruitment piece, like where do you see businesses get it really right, and where do you see them get it really wrong?
So I'll start with where I've seen it go wrong.
Okay.
And that can be, obviously, the startup, you're in the early stage of growth, you think you've found someone and it's very exciting and you steam ahead. And what don't we have? We've not thought about your employment documents. So you don't have a contract or an agreement in place. And even though an employment contract is beneficial for an employee, it is probably even more important for you as an employer, because you will have certain restrictions and protections in there. And if they're not signed, it doesn't mean anything. And so we're talking about things like post-termination restrictions or intellectual property.
So what's the post-termination restriction? What does that mean to a non-legal mind?
So post-termination restriction can be anything such as non-compete clauses. So maybe you have a candidate or, well, now an employee who has all this fantastic intel about you, how you run your business, and they've got this information that if they were to go to a competitor, it could be quite damaging for you. So post-termination restriction stops them from maybe competing with you for a certain period of time after they leave your employment. Quite a hot topic. A lot of employers want them in, and it's really beneficial. And so I've seen it where employer clients have got quite excited and they don't have the necessary protections or documentation in place, and that's something that you want to have in. Another thing as well is also considering whether you actually want an employee contract, or actually are you talking about someone that you want on a self-employed basis. You want to make sure that you've got the right contracts for each type of worker and not to swap them around, because that can cause issues down the line for an employer.
So you could presumably, if you don't have all this stuff right in the right from the start, then you can get it in place later on, but then it's just presumably a bit more complicated.
A bit more complicated, a lot more cost than it would have been if you got it right in the first place. And something that can easily be dealt with if you just got it right in the first place. It's really important to have good contracts in place and agreements, and again, you can get a specialist or an expert to help you with that. You can either outsource that completely and get somebody to help you with that, or have someone review it and make sure that maybe a template that you're using is legally robust and compliant.
And actually, even with, so we just thinking about how we do it ourselves, we have a set of templates, but obviously we are fortuitous in that we have in-house advice. But we, even with those templates, actually, we still we still, because you've written them, you know what's in them, but they still need updated every so often because to make sure, because the law obviously changes at times.
They need updating, and every employee has different needs and you have different requirements of them. So even if you have a template, it's still going to need, one size doesn't fit all. We know this, and so you want to make sure that employment contract definitely covers what it needs to based on that specific employee.
Okay, so that is where it goes wrong. Where does it go right? Where
it goes right, and it sounds very cliche, is where employers have just trusted their guts.
Yeah.
So they've been in an interview, there's something that's not quite right. Maybe the person that they're interviewing, they see that it doesn't fit their ethos or what the brand stands for example, and they've trusted their gut, and it's gone well.
Yeah.
Obviously, me being the employment solicitor that I am, I would say yes, trust your gut, but obviously make sure the decisions are still not based on any sort of discriminatory reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Kerry. What about from your side, Kerry? Where do you see companies do a brilliant job and equally?
Yeah, I think for me, the answer to both parts is get your recruitment right. So if you get your recruitment right, you're more likely to succeed, less likely to fail. Remember those 10 first employees that are going to shape your business. Take your time, you know, have strategic recruitment goals, and use an expert when you need them.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much both.
Thank you.
If anybody will ask now if anybody's got any questions. If you don't, then either way we'll be following up with everybody with the contact details of both Kerry and Dee Dee. So please feel free to get in touch if there's anything that sparked a sort of question. If you've suddenly thought, oh, I'm not sure I've done this right, or this is coming up, I might need a bit of help. So we'll share those details in due course. Let me just see if there's any questions. No, not at the moment. So yeah, please feel free to get in contact. And thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.